Professional wrestling is really hard. I think even some fans forget this sometimes because we watch it so much, but bad things are going down constantly. Comes with the territory. While most of the time this would just be bumps and bruises, the bar gets raised and then some occasionally to the point a performer's face gets reworked. Sheesh. I'm Simon from What Culture. Please do hit that subscribe button. This is 10 ways wrestlers' faces were altered forever because of wrestling. Number 10, Cody Rhodes' scar. At AEW's Full Gear pay-per-view, Cody Rhodes took on Chris Jericho for the world title. Sadly for Cody, he wasn't able to win the big one that night, but he did come away with something, a pretty vicious scar. Happening when Cody dove at Le Champion, Jericho moved as intended, but as can happen, Rhodes' momentum sent him flying into the metal platform ramp, and it busted him open. The next day, AEW posted an update of this alongside a horrific looking picture of the wound and confirmed Cody had to have stitches to get it to stop gushing. It even kept him out of action for a short while. On top of that, he now has a left scar over his eye, which I suppose is just another war wound about the dangers all wrestlers take. Number 9, The Undertaker's eye socket fracture. The dead man has pretty much had every injury under the sun. Stands to reason when you've had a 35-year career, but if you're like me, this one will make you shudder inside more than most. Speaking on the Joe Rogan Experience, the pair went into his extensive list of woes from hip replacement surgery and basically breaking every bone in his body. The worst one though, or at least one of, is when he shattered his orbital bone in 2010 against none other than Rey Mysterio, and yes, that means he broke his eye. Coming on SmackDown when the dead man was Hurricane Rana'd into the top turnbuckle, Rey then overshot a springboard senton and landed right on Taker's face. You can see straight away something is wrong, mostly as blood was pouring from his skin, and yes, his eyes and nose were basically shattered. Of course, being an old school wrestler, Taker finished the match. This still affects him today, and he described how his peripheral vision is still off, and if he looks to the side, he can pretty much see double. What the flip is going on? Number 8, Devon Dudley's forehead. There's a bunch of wrestlers who have gnarly foreheads, be it from jabbing forks into it or raking it on barbed wire. Even someone like Triple H has scars if you look close enough. It's just what wrestlers do. There's also blading when someone drives some metal into their face, and while I'm sure there are others we could pick on, Devon Dudley is near the top of the pile from all the crazy things he did in ECW. Violence and mad stunts helped both Devon and Brother Bubba Ray rise up the ranks as they threw themselves off ladders, as well as smash people with chairs. Of course, they were then also twonked with these, hence the cuts. Just go and find a picture of Devon's head and you shall see this though, mostly as he's bald. And I know all about this. Having no hair just leaves you all kinds of exposed. Number 7, a one-eared Mick Foley. Few wrestlers have put themselves through the ringer as much as Mick Foley. The amount of injuries are just incredible, from suffering internal bleeding to having a tooth fly out of his mouth when he got thrown through the Hell in a Cell. He is one of the toughest people to ever step into a wrestling ring, and yet the most famous of these came when he went face to face with Vader in Germany. Back then he was Cactus Jack, a dude that would take any risk, whereas Vader was known for being one of the stiffest guys in the locker room. Late on in the match, Foley got his head tangled in the ropes, and when trying to free himself, the top of his right ear came loose. Given he was filled with adrenaline, he didn't realize how serious this was and just went back to throwing punches at the Mastodon. This was a huge mistake, as Vader then landed a forearm that was so flush, this part of Foley's ear came off. Surprise, surprise, blood was then gushing down Mick's face. It took a 4-hour operation to try and sort this, and like everyone on this list, if you want to see the fallout, just find any picture of Mrs. Foley's baby boy. Number 6, Shawn Michaels' lazy eye. As a man who also suffers from a lazy eye, I get how bothersome this can be. And while the likes of Triple H have mocked his best friend for his wonky vision, it did indeed start after a wrestling match. Brought to light on the Shawn Michaels vs. Bret Hart Greatest Rivalries DVD, the Hitman does just ask HBK what the deal is. As he explains, it all started when he took on Kane at Unforgiven 2004. It is kind of terrifying too. Anyone who's anyone will tell you that the Big Red Machine is one of the safest wrestlers in the game, and yet during this bout, Michaels took a bump that weakened the muscles in his eye. It's basically one of those things that can just happen to you when you're throwing yourself around a ring, but it got really bad 4 years later when during his feud with Chris Jericho, Shawn was hurled into the Jerrytron. That left Michaels with a detached retina, and you gotta guess these two things together didn't help, so be careful, people, you never know. Number 5, Finn Balor's broken jaw. This one is recent and so bad, and yet it didn't really get shouted about enough, or at least I don't think so. But during his awesome match with Kyle O'Reilly at NXT TakeOver 30, Balor was smashed with a running knee that left blood pouring out of his mouth. It was quite the visual, and somehow Finn was able to finish, but honestly, go and find the x-rays or even pictures of Balor after this. He had been rocked. His jaw was essentially hanging to one side, and he had to have surgery for 2 fractures, including one that was going into his tooth. So doctors had to remove that before his jaw was wired shut. This was just the start too, and Finn even said afterwards, had they known how bad this was, he likely would have been stripped of the NXT title. Just to sum this up, when this scrap won Match of the Year in NXT, Balor said he didn't need an award because the 3 plates in his mouth would always remind him of it. Can somebody please go and give Finn Balor a hug before Mark Briscoe's teeth? In the first round of Pro Wrestling Unplugged's Public Enemy Pitbull's Memorial Tag Team Cup in Philadelphia, Mark Briscoe suffered hideous damage to his face that kinda changed his gimmick for the rest of his career. During the match, his brother Jay Briscoe swung a chair and accidentally struck Mark, who was behind him, knocking his 4 front teeth out and tearing his gums up in the process. Mark was in agony and was briefly out of action, and ever since has sported a toothless grin, though to be fair, that only enhanced the wild and cutthroat legend the Briscoe brothers preached in Ring of Honor and beyond. Mark also once tried to put his fake dentures on eBay and fully intended to sell them, but as it turned out, this violated eBay's policy on human remains and body parts, and that kind of makes sense. Number 3, New Jack is blind in one eye. As his theme song suggested, New Jack came across as a natural-born killer and wasn't someone to mess with. If you did, there was gonna be consequences. So at ECW's Living Dangerously pay-per-view in 2000, New Jack wrestled Vic Grimes to a brutal no contest. At one point in the match, they were supposed to fall from a 20-foot high scaffolding rig onto tables below, but there was some kind of miscommunication. Instead, New Jack fell, grabbed Grimes as he went, and the 300-pounder landed right on Jack's head. Brain fluid immediately leaked out of his nose after falling, mostly because he'd suffered a skull fracture, which, yes, left him blind in one eye. There was major heat directed at Grimes afterwards from Jack, with the two somehow getting booked in the same match again in a scaffold match for XPW in 2002. Looking for revenge, Jack tasered Grimes for real high above the ring and sent him crashing down from 40 feet up. New Jack has gone on record as saying he intended to kill Grimes with the fall, and now, let's never talk about this again. It legitimately gives me the heebie-jeebies. Number 2, Warhorse gets lacerated. Warhorse has been a standout on the indie scene for some time, so much so, he got to make his AEW Dynamite debut in 2020. He took on Cody Rhodes for that there TNT title. He lost, of course, but I bet that felt better than the horrible injury he suffered 2 years prior to this when wrestling for 0-1. Going head-to-head with Gary Jay in a last man standing match, Jay tore off the ring ropes, grabbed the metal hinge that keeps them together, and put it in Warhorse's mouth. The idea was he was going to tear a hole in his cheek, then it actually happened. Gary threw Horse from the ring, this hook did not come out, and it ripped his mouth clean open. The side of his face was basically hanging off. Once again, adrenaline was here to make Warhorse think all was fine, and then this dude. When he arrived at the hospital later on and the nurse asked what happened, he replied, "I lost my smile," and of course now he still has a huge scar on his lip. 0-1 had to apologize to fans, as a few of them thought it was a little bit too much. Number 1, Brock Lesnar's cauliflower ear. Brock Lesnar can handle pain. Even if we got into his wrestling and UFC career, we then have to discuss his battle with diverticulitis, which meant he had to have 12 inches of his colon removed. It legitimately almost killed him. He also has a face scar courtesy of Cain Velasquez from the UFC 121 main event, and yet the one you would notice the most is his cauliflower ear. Like many wrestlers, this is a condition where the ear becomes permanently swollen, and many of his peers suffered from this too, including Bruno Sammartino and Buddy Rogers. Starting when he began his amateur career, it doubled after he got into mixed martial arts, and if you find any sit-down interview with Lesnar, it's beyond obvious. I mean, why wouldn't it be? He has a cauliflower for an ear from all those years of when it was rubbing against other people's skin. It had also gotten so bad by the time he returned to the WWE in 2012 that some fans even speculated he was wearing an earpiece.